In the dead of night on March 8, 1968, deep beneath the freezing waters of the Pacific Ocean, the Soviet ballistic missile submarine K-129 vanished without a trace, taking with it 98 sailors, 3 nuclear-tipped missiles, and one of the most closely guarded sets of secrets in the Cold War. And what began as a tragedy for the Soviet Navy would soon become the foundation of one of the most ambitious, expensive, and audacious espionage operations in American history. A mission so secret that the U.S. government invented an entirely new phrase just to deal with questions about it. We can neither confirm nor deny. As the submarine slipped into the abyss, Soviet search vessels scoured thousands of square miles of open ocean, believing the sub had suffered a catastrophic internal failure somewhere near Hawaii. But after 2 months of fruitless searching, they abandoned the effort, convinced that the ocean had swallowed their vessel forever. The CIA, however, saw an opportunity so valuable it bordered on science fiction. If the United States could locate the submarine, raise it from 3 miles below the surface, and recover its contents, they would gain unprecedented access to Soviet missile design, nuclear technology, encryption codes, and naval strategy, intelligence that could shift the balance of power overnight. But there was a problem. Nothing like this had ever been attempted before. The ocean at that depth exerted crushing pressure. Darkness was absolute. Temperatures hovered just above freezing. And even if the CIA could find the submarine, lifting a 2,000-ton wreck from 16,500 feet below the surface without the Soviets noticing was, by all rational standards, impossible. Yet in the high-stakes world of Cold War espionage, impossible was merely a challenge waiting to be overcome. American intelligence analysts began the hunt using the Navy's top-secret SOSUS network, a chain of underwater listening posts designed to track Soviet submarines across the Pacific. They combed through acoustic recordings until they found what sounded like the death of K-129, a deep metallic implosion signature consistent with a submarine hull collapse. Using triangulation, U.S. Navy deep-sea experts pinpointed a rough impact zone. Then came the hard part, actually finding the sub. In 1968, deep-sea imaging technology was primitive. The CIA partnered with the Navy to deploy a classified remote-operated vehicle called the Argo system, dragging cameras across the seafloor for weeks at a time. Hundreds of hours of grainy footage revealed nothing but sand, rocks, and darkness, until, suddenly, the silhouette appeared. A massive, cylindrical hull lying broken on the seabed. The Americans had found K-129. What happened next would push American engineering into uncharted territory. The CIA briefed President Lyndon Johnson, who immediately grasped the potential intelligence windfall. Nuclear missile guidance systems, Soviet naval, doctrine, onboard communication logs, cryptographic key materials. If even a fraction of the submarine could be recovered, it would represent one of the greatest intelligence coups of the Cold War. The CIA assembled a team known as the Special Projects Staff, a group of engineers, intelligence officers, and naval architects tasked with figuring out how to raise a submarine from the deep without alerting the Soviet Union. Their conclusion shocked even themselves. It was technically possible, barely. Maybe, if everything went perfectly. And so, Project Azorian was born, a covert operation so massive it required a custom-built ship, classified contracts, cover stories involving billionaire industrialists, and billions of dollars. The CIA needed a front company capable of constructing the largest deep ocean recovery system ever built, and they needed a public explanation that sounded plausible enough to deflect curiosity. Enter Howard Hughes. The eccentric billionaire, already known for his mysterious personality and experimental projects, became the perfect cover. The CIA approached him with a proposition: lend his name and corporate network to a fake deep-sea mining expedition. Hughes agreed, and the world's press soon reported that Hughes was building a ship designed to extract valuable minerals from the ocean floor, using groundbreaking new technology. The story was brilliant. It explained why the ship, named the Glomar Explorer, was so huge. It explained the bizarre machinery, the claw-like mechanical grabbers, the massive central well in the ship's hull. To the public, Hughes was embarking on another eccentric, futuristic adventure. In reality, the mining system was a disguise. Hidden beneath the ship's false bottom was a colossal steel claw, known internally as the capture vehicle, built to descend 3 miles into the ocean, attach itself around a sunken Soviet submarine, and lift the broken vessel intact into the center of the ship. The scale of the engineering was unprecedented. The claw had to withstand unimaginable pressure. The lifting mechanism, thousands of feet of interlocking steel pipe, had to function like the world's longest and strongest hydraulic arm. The ship itself needed a moon pool, an internal chamber where the submarine wreck could be concealed from view once recovered, preventing Soviet reconnaissance satellites or spy ships from seeing what was happening. But building the Glomar Explorer was only one challenge. Another loomed large. The Soviets routinely patrolled the area. If they spotted anything suspicious, the entire mission would collapse. The CIA had to succeed quietly, invisibly, perfectly. When the Glomar Explorer finally sailed in 1974 from California toward the recovery zone, it carried one of the most secret crews ever assembled. CIA engineers posing as marine scientists, technicians trained to operate machinery no civilian oceanographer had ever seen, and covert, intelligence personnel prepared to evade Soviet attention at all costs. As the ship neared the site, a Soviet spy ship appeared on the horizon, shadowing the Glomar Explorer at close distance. This created immediate danger. The Soviet vessel, nicknamed by the Americans as a fishing trawler, even though it was clearly a surveillance craft, recorded photographs, radio transmissions, and ship movements. The CIA crew played their roles flawlessly, pretending to conduct deep-sea mineral research, lowering fake equipment into the water, and maintaining strictly controlled radio silence. Meanwhile, beneath the surface, the real operation began. The massive mechanical claw descended slowly through the black water, taking hours to reach the ocean floor. The tension on board the Glomar Explorer was overwhelming. If the claw jammed, the pipes buckled, or the sub broke apart, the mission would fail spectacularly and publicly. When the claw finally touched down near K-129, the crew began maneuvering it into position. Every movement was monitored by sonar and sensors. The slightest misalignment could cause catastrophic damage. After hours of painstaking adjustments, the claw closed around the submarine hull. The crew initiated the lift. 3 miles above, the steel pipes began to straighten and strain as thousands of tons of weight transferred upward. The ship groaned under pressure. Alarms sounded repeatedly. Engineers adjusted ballast, recalibrated tension, and countered shifting underwater currents that tried to tear the pipes apart. Halfway up, disaster struck. A section of the submarine broke away from the claw and plummeted back into the abyss beyond recovery. What remained in the claw, however, might still contain priceless intelligence. With no margin for error, the crew continued lifting until the fragment of K-129 disappeared into the ship's moon pool. Soviet surveillance ships watched from a distance, unaware that the Americans had just succeeded in raising part of their submarine from impossible depth. When the sealed doors closed and the ship sailed away, Project Azorian entered legend, a secret mission that no one outside the CIA, the White House, and a handful of naval engineers knew had ever happened. The moment the broken section of K-129 entered the hidden moon pool deep inside the Glomar Explorer, the operation shifted from one impossible challenge to another, as CIA engineers and naval specialists prepared to examine the most sensitive intelligence material the United States had ever recovered from the ocean floor, all while maintaining the illusion that nothing unusual was happening aboard the massive ship, watched constantly by Soviet surveillance vessels. Once the moon pool doors closed and seawater finished draining, the crew rushed to secure the submarine wreckage and begin the delicate process of opening and inspecting it. In the dimly lit interior of the ship's concealed chamber, the retrieved portion of K-129 twisted and crushed from the violent implosion that had killed its crew. The steel hull had been ripped open like a crushed can, and the interior was littered with debris, silt, broken equipment, and tragically the remains of several Soviet sailors who had gone down with the sub. The discovery of bodies created an unexpected moral dilemma for the CIA. The mission had always been focused on intelligence, not personal effects, not human remains. But now the United States had in its custody the dead of an adversary they were not supposed to be disturbing at all. With absolute secrecy required, there could be no handover to families, no public acknowledgement, no international cooperation. And so, in one of the most quietly dignified and haunting episodes of the entire Cold War, the CIA arranged a secret burial at sea. The bodies were placed in metal canisters, draped with a Soviet naval flag, and lowered with full military honors into the Pacific, all documented on classified film. No Soviet official learned of it until decades later, and even then only through declassified footage. But beyond this solemn moment, the intelligence recovered from K-129 was the true objective. Among the debris were fragments of missile tubes, components of Soviet nuclear warheads, cryptographic materials, sonar equipment, and communication logs. Analysts worked in rotating shifts inside the sealed compartment, attempting to salvage anything that could reveal Soviet missile guidance systems or encryption techniques. While much of the submarine had been too badly damaged to yield complete systems, even fragments provided clues about Soviet design philosophy, materials engineering, and payload structure. But the most valuable potential target remained elusive: the Soviets' nuclear launch codebook, which may have been stored in the section of the sub that broke away during the lift and fell back into the abyss. Despite this setback, the CIA still considered the mission a major intelligence victory, enough to justify the enormous cost of the operation. Yet the United States was not celebrating openly. Above deck, the Glomar Explorer continued broadcasting its cover story. CIA personnel posed for photos as faux mining engineers, waved at the Soviet surveillance vessel shadowing them, and pretended to lower mineral extraction equipment into the sea. Soviet intelligence, baffled but suspicious, recorded everything they could but found no clear evidence of espionage. After nearly a month at sea, the Glomar Explorer set course for the United States. Once back in port, the submarine material was transferred to CIA laboratories for deeper analysis. Meanwhile, the agency prepared to report the partial success of Project Azorian to the president. But keeping this colossal operation secret was becoming increasingly difficult. The Glomar Explorer had been too large, too unusual, and too expensive to escape notice forever. Reporters began asking questions about why a ship, built by Howard Hughes, funded through obscure government contracts and equipped with unheard-of deep-sea technology, had suddenly appeared in the middle of the Pacific. The CIA knew it needed to tighten security. What they did not know was that the biggest threat to secrecy would come not from Soviet spies, but from an American break-in. In 1974, while the Glomar Explorer was still operating, burglars broke into the offices of Summa Corporation, Howard Hughes' company, and stole documents detailing classified aspects of the CIA partnership. These documents soon found their way to journalists. By early 1975, the Los Angeles Times and the New York Times had uncovered enough details to publish explosive stories linking the ship to a CIA covert operation involving a Soviet submarine. The CIA, blindsided, scrambled to contain the damage. For the first time in its history, the agency responded to reporters' questions with a phrase that would become legendary in American intelligence history. "We can neither confirm nor deny the existence of such an operation." This evasive reply, intended as a one-time solution, soon became the standard answer to any inquiry involving classified sources or methods, and is now known globally as the Glomar response. As news broke, the Soviet Union reacted with shock and outrage. They had long suspected that the Glomar Explorer was more than a mining vessel, but the revelation that the Americans had targeted one of their lost submarines for recovery was perceived as an egregious violation of sovereignty. Soviet naval leaders feared that the United States might have recovered nuclear weapons, missile technology, or cryptographic secrets, all of which could shift the balance of strategic deterrence. Diplomatic protests were lodged. Propaganda networks denounced the CIA as grave robbers, and Soviet newspapers accused the United States of exploiting tragedy for espionage. But beneath the anger, Soviet intelligence was deeply impressed and alarmed by the scale of American engineering capability. If the United States could raise a submarine from 3 miles underwater, what else could they do? Could they recover Soviet missile fragments? Could they tap undersea communication cables? Could they sabotage Soviet naval operations in ways the USSR had never imagined? These fears fed into broader Soviet anxieties about technological inferiority, a theme that would dominate the final decades of the Cold War. Meanwhile, inside the CIA, debate erupted about whether a second recovery attempt should be mounted to retrieve the missing section of K-129. The Soviets were now fully aware of U.S. interest in the site, and a return mission risked confrontation. Additionally, the Glomar Explorer had drawn too much attention. President Ford ultimately decided that any second attempt was too dangerous, too expensive, and too politically explosive. Project Azorian, the most ambitious salvage operation in intelligence history, would not be repeated. Yet its effects rippled throughout the intelligence community. The operation demonstrated what was possible when the CIA, private contractors, and U.S. naval engineering worked together. It pushed deep-sea salvage technology decades ahead, and it gave the United States invaluable insight into Soviet naval capabilities at a time when nuclear tensions remained high. The CIA prepared internal reports summarizing the intelligence gain. Missile components, communication equipment, operational manuals, and metallurgical samples that revealed Soviet manufacturing limitations. Much of the recovered information remains classified to this day. Yet even with its successes, Project Azorian remained a half-finished victory, a glimpse into Soviet secrets rather than a complete capture. The missing section of K-129 containing the launch keys and code materials continued to haunt U.S. intelligence, reminding them that even the most ambitious operations cannot guarantee total success. Still, The United States had done what no nation had ever attempted: reach 3 miles down into the ocean, retrieve a nuclear submarine, and bring part of it to the surface without triggering war. And despite enormous public interest, the full truth of the mission remained hidden behind layers of classification, rumors, and partial leaks for decades. Project Azorian became a legend, a story whispered among intelligence officers, denied publicly by officials, and speculated about endlessly by journalists and Cold War historians. As public speculation about the Glomar Explorer grew louder and the CIA fought desperately to preserve the secrecy of Project Azorian, political pressures began mounting on all sides, forcing the agency to operate in a tightening ring of scrutiny while simultaneously managing the fallout of the operation's revelation. And nowhere were these pressures more acute than in Washington, where lawmakers and intelligence officials clashed over the limits of secrecy, the scope of CIA authority, and the political consequences of admitting to a covert mission that risked confrontation with the Soviet Union. Congressional committees demanded explanations. Reporters kept digging. Foreign governments asked pointed questions. Even the limited information leaked to the press suggested a mission of staggering scale and audacity, raising uncomfortable questions about oversight and legality. The CIA's leadership, already reeling from the political turbulence of the Watergate era and the growing momentum of congressional investigations into intelligence abuses, realized that Project Azorian had become a symbol of a deeper issue: a government agency operating with near unlimited resources, conducting covert operations that even senior officials struggled to fully understand. At the same time, Soviet leaders were confronting their own internal dilemma: the revelation that the Americans had attempted to steal a Soviet nuclear submarine embarrassed the Soviet Navy and angered the Politburo, which feared that the failure to detect the CIA's operation exposed dangerous weaknesses in Soviet reconnaissance and military preparedness. Although the Soviets publicly denounced the mission as an act of espionage, internally they were stunned by the engineering achievement. Military analysts briefed General Secretary Leonid Brezhnev on the implications, warning him that the United States now demonstrated not only advanced deep-sea recovery capabilities, but possibly other specialized technologies applicable to undersea warfare. Some Soviet officers worried that the Americans might already be tapping communication cables or retrieving missile debris from past missile tests. Others feared that U.S. special projects like this could expand into sabotage operations. For a superpower already struggling economically and technologically, the idea that their rival had opened a new frontier of covert warfare was deeply unsettling. Meanwhile, the question of what exactly had been recovered from K-129 remained a point of intense curiosity and speculation worldwide. Although most of the intelligence was classified, leaks suggested that the CIA had recovered nuclear missile components, cryptographic manuals, and sonar systems. Soviet intelligence, trying to determine how much of their strategic doctrine had been compromised, launched multiple internal audits to identify possible vulnerabilities. Cryptographic officers reviewed emergency procedures for dealing with lost codebooks, while naval designers were instructed to accelerate modernization programs. Some Soviet officers privately admitted that even limited intelligence from K-129 might give the Americans a decade-long advantage in understanding Soviet missile reliability and safety systems. Back in the United States, the Glomar Explorer became an object of fascination. Engineers marveled at its innovations. Journalists probed the inconsistencies in the official cover story, and congressional investigators sought answers about who had approved the billions of dollars in funding. The ship itself, now too publicly exposed to be used for covert missions, became the subject of intense debate. Should it continue operating as a genuine mining vessel? Should it be mothballed? Or should it be repurposed for new classified missions? The CIA recognized that too many eyes were now watching. The illusion of secrecy had evaporated. Any future use of the Glomar Explorer would draw attention, and the vessel's unique construction made it instantly recognizable. In the end, the ship was quietly transferred into private and commercial use, though its Cold War legacy continued to shadow everything it did. Meanwhile, inside the White House and CIA headquarters, officials prepared for long-term political fallout. Project Azorian became one of the central topics of internal discussions about reform, oversight, and the future direction of covert operations. While the mission had been technically successful, the political disaster surrounding its exposure forced policymakers to reconsider how far intelligence agencies should be allowed to go without public knowledge. Yet for all the controversy, few in government disputed the strategic value of the intelligence recovered. Even partial information from K-129 gave analysts insights into Soviet missile engineering, emergency procedures, crew training, and communication systems. It allowed the U.S. to refine assumptions about Soviet nuclear doctrine and evaluate the reliability of Soviet SLBMs, submarine-launched ballistic missiles, at a time when both nations were locked in a dangerous arms race. But beyond the technical and political ramifications, Project Azorian also carried a deeper symbolic weight. It illustrated the lengths to which the United States and the Soviet Union were willing to go for an advantage, technological, strategic, or psychological. It revealed the incredible ingenuity unlocked by Cold War competition and the immense risks attached to operations conducted in total secrecy. It also showed the dangerous consequences of overlapping technological ambition with geopolitical paranoia. As the dust settled, Cold War historians began to reconstruct the narrative of the mission from fragments of testimony, leaked documents, and declassified reports. Many were struck by how Project Azorian encapsulated the era's defining features: the fear of nuclear conflict, the complexity of global espionage, the rapid evolution of military technology, and the enormous cost, financial and moral, of sustaining a superpower rivalry. Analysts also noted that Project Azorian reinforced a broader shift happening within the intelligence world. No longer was espionage defined solely by human agents, spies, and informants. The new frontier involved satellites, submarines, advanced computing, and deep-sea engineering. Intelligence had become a contest of machinery, logistics, and physics. But the human element remained. The CIA officers who led the mission endured tremendous stress and responsibility, knowing that a single mistake could lead not only to mission failure, but to international confrontation. The engineers who designed the lifting system worked under crushing deadlines and unprecedented pressure, knowing that they were building machinery that no one had ever attempted before. And the sailors of K-129, whose deaths had triggered this entire chain of events, remained an eerily silent presence in the story, victims of the Cold War's unforgiving logic. Families of the lost Soviet submariners never received a full explanation from their government. The official Soviet account remained vague, and even after the fall of the USSR, many details stayed buried in classified archives. When the CIA's burial at sea footage was finally released decades later, showing American officers laying Soviet sailors to rest with ceremony and respect, it stunned the families, contradicting the narrative they had been told for years. Some found solace in the dignity of the gesture. Others felt anger that their government had concealed it, For the United States, releasing the footage was also a calculated move. It demonstrated moral high ground, showcased American professionalism, and softened the perception of an intelligence operation that many still considered morally ambiguous. But even after the release, questions lingered. What exactly had the CIA recovered? How much of the submarine had been examined? Did the United States gain nuclear codes? Did they learn anything about Soviet launch procedures? Official answers remained elusive. The phrase, "we can neither confirm nor deny," continued shielding the truth behind layers of national security restrictions. Project Azorian became a case study in how secrecy, technology, and geopolitics intertwine. Even today, historians and intelligence analysts continue debating its full ramifications. Some argue that it shifted the strategic balance. Others claim it served primarily as a psychological victory, demonstrating American technical superiority. But all agree on one thing: nothing like Project Azorian had ever been attempted before, and nothing like it has been attempted since. As the decades passed and the Cold War faded into history, Project Azorian remained one of the most extraordinary, misunderstood, and heavily mythologized covert operations the CIA had ever undertaken, shrouded in secrecy long after many other classified missions had been declassified. And the legend surrounding the Glomar Explorer only grew as new generations of analysts and historians pieced together fragments of truth from interviews, leaked documents, declassified memos, and engineering reports. Even within the intelligence community, the operation took on an almost mythical weight, a symbol of American technical ambition, bureaucratic audacity, and Cold War desperation. The mission had been born out of fear that the Soviet Union held technological advantages, fear that the U.S. Navy lacked critical insight into Soviet missile reliability, and fear that nuclear parity might tilt in favor of Moscow. It was also born out of opportunity. Finding K-129 had been a stroke of intelligence fortune. Raising it from 3 miles beneath the ocean's surface had been a feat of engineering genius. But the more people learned about the mission, the clearer it became that Project Azorian was not just an espionage story. It was a reflection of the entire strategic psychology of the era. The operation exposed the terrifying fragility of Cold War stability, where the loss of a submarine, the misinterpretation of sonar signals, or the accidental discovery of classified documents in a billionaire's office could trigger consequences that rippled across continents. It also illustrated the extraordinary lengths to which governments were willing to go in pursuit of advantage, technological, ideological, or psychological. For the Soviet Union, the loss of K-129 remained a painful wound. Even after the USSR's collapse, official accounts of the submarine's sinking and the American recovery efforts remained contradictory and incomplete. Some Soviet officers claimed the sub had suffered a catastrophic mechanical failure. Others insisted it had collided with an American submarine. Still others suggested a missile malfunction had doomed the vessel. None of these explanations were fully confirmed. When Russian naval historians finally gained limited access to Soviet-era archives, they discovered a chaotic record of conflicting reports, hasty assessments, and bureaucratic confusion. The truth, like the submarine itself, remained buried beneath layers of political pressure and institutional secrecy. Meanwhile, American analysts continued debating the intelligence value of the recovered wreckage. Some argued that the CIA had obtained critical insights into Soviet missile construction, corrosion-resistant materials, and warhead architecture. Others insisted that the most valuable components had fallen back into the abyss when the submarine broke apart during the lift. A few claimed, privately, that the U.S. had learned more from the attempt than the recovery itself, using the engineering breakthroughs to advance deep-sea military capabilities that remain classified to this day. But beyond the technical details, Project Azorian left behind a profound cultural and political legacy. The Glomar response, the now iconic phrase, "We can neither confirm nor deny," became a cornerstone of government secrecy doctrine and appears today in legal rulings, FOIA requests, and intelligence press statements. It has shaped how agencies communicate about classified operations and symbolizes the tension between transparency and national security in the modern era. The story also reshaped public understanding of CIA operations. For many Americans, the Glomar Explorer became a symbol of Cold War excess, a reminder of a time when intelligence agencies operated with massive budgets, minimal oversight, and near-total secrecy. Yet for others, it represented American ingenuity at its peak, a daring mission that showcased the nation's ability to solve impossible problems under extraordinary pressure. In Russia, the operation remains controversial and politically sensitive. News of the CIA burial at sea ceremony was met with mixed reactions. Some families appreciated the respect shown to the fallen sailors. Others viewed it as an infringement on national dignity. Russian naval officials rarely discuss the incident openly, and when they do, the tone is often defensive or dismissive. But within Russian military academies, Project Azorian is studied with a mixture of awe and anxiety, a reminder that technological inferiority can disguise deeper strategic vulnerabilities. Today, remnants of the Glomar Explorer's legacy still linger. The ship itself, after being sold and repurposed multiple times, was eventually scrapped. Some of its components were preserved by maritime museums, while other pieces quietly disappeared into private collections. The site where K-129 rests remains off-limits, a deep, quiet grave marked only by coordinates and memory. The CIA continues to classify portions of the mission, and many technical details remain unknown to the public. But the operation's broader meaning is now clear. Project Azorian was a manifestation of Cold War extremity, a story of nations so locked in rivalry that they were willing to drill into the deepest trenches of the ocean for even the slightest edge. It showcased the boundless reach of state power at a time when superpowers believed that survival depended on superiority in every conceivable domain: space, land, sea, intelligence, and now the ocean floor. And yet, despite its secrecy, the mission also revealed the human side of Cold War conflict. The burial at sea footage, withheld for decades, showed Americans honoring Soviet dead with flags and ceremony, a moment that quietly contradicted the narrative of pure hostility between the two nations. It served as a reminder that behind every strategic confrontation were people: sailors, engineers, intelligence officers, and families caught in the geopolitical tides of their era. When the CIA finally released edited details of the mission in the early 2000s, journalists and historians were stunned by the complexity of the operation. Some compared it to the moon landing, an engineering effort so ambitious that it should have been impossible. Others argued that the project symbolized the dangerous hubris of Cold War intelligence agencies. But regardless of perspective, Project Azorian stands as a landmark in espionage history. It represents the intersection of secrecy and science, the blending of politics and physics, and the extraordinary capabilities unlocked by national paranoia. Above all, it remains one of the boldest covert operations ever attempted, and one that captures the essence of Cold War competition in a way few stories can. The mission to raise K-129 didn't change the outcome of the Cold War. It didn't produce a decisive intelligence breakthrough. It didn't win battles or topple regimes. But it did something more symbolic. It proved that, in the Cold War, even the ocean floor was not beyond reach, that secrets buried beneath miles of water could be targets of espionage, and that the superpowers' rivalry extended into every imaginable domain. Project Azorian's legacy continues to fascinate because it reflects a time when nations pursued advantage at any cost, when secrecy defined policy, and when the world's two dominant powers engaged in an unending struggle for supremacy that shaped every corner of modern history. And although the wreckage of K-129 still lies in silence on the Pacific seabed, the story of its brief resurrection lives on as a testament to human ingenuity, Cold War ambition, and the shadowy boundaries of intelligence warfare. Boundaries that, even today, remain shrouded in mystery and marked by the famous phrase born from this mission: "We can neither confirm nor deny."